This is National Sales Director Leah Lachlan, and this is audio number 11 out of our 13-week plan for new directors. And this audio is about how to coach a business debut. And I was raised in Mary Kay being taught to do business debuts. And I had a business debut as a new consultant. That was my very first party that kick-started my business as a new consultant. And then I was taught to have business debuts for new unit members that came into my unit. And the benefit of being raised doing a business debut is that it's a great way to be in front of people. And it's a great way to support your new consultants. The downfall to being raised a certain way is that you forget that there's other ways to do it. And so I want to challenge you with a new thought, that the business debut is not for everyone. Now, there are many, many advantages to a business debut. I think it's a great way to get a new consultant started in this business, but it's not necessarily for everyone, because the downside to a business debut is that a consultant usually won't do anything else in her business until she has her debut. And her debut is sometimes 2 to even 6 weeks from the point that she orders her starter kit. So think of all that time, 2 to 6 weeks on average. There's not really a lot happening in her business. I was the same way. When I started, I didn't do anything until I had my business debut because I was just waiting to have my business debut. And I just figured I would get started at that point. And although there's nothing wrong with that, doing that, and it didn't hold me back from being successful, I still do believe that there's a lot of wasted time in the beginning after a consultant orders her starter kit and her inventory. And so the new thought is, once a consultant orders her inventory, coach her on how to do a power start and have her start booking parties that day. And coach her on a power start booking script and have her start calling her friends and family that day to just book a power start that month instead of having a debut. If a consultant does want a business debut, once I book that business debut, I do coach her on Gen X and say, and talk about the fact that it would be a great way to start her business to get Gen X under her belt by the time her business debut rolls around, just so she can get her feet wet and start getting some faces in and also earn that Gen X recognition that month. And so I do break down the Gen X program for her and explain what it is. I explain how she can get recognized. I explain how she can be accountable with the Gen X program by turning in her numbers. And I equip her with a booking script so that she can get started on working on Gen X right then and there and start calling friends and family to start booking parties before her debut. Okay, so a business debut is not for everyone. If you've got a sharp, ready right now woman who's just like itching to get started and she really wants to do something with this business, don't make her wait 4 weeks until she has her business debut. Get her in motion and in action with bookings and working towards Gen X or Gen X Elite that month. Okay, so use your intuition on that. When I was a newer director, I basically did a business debut for almost everyone, regardless of their inventory order. And there were advantages and disadvantages to that. The advantage was that I got myself in front of people. And with a smaller unit size, that was my priority, was to be in front of people. And so even if it wasn't a consultant who could get inventory, I still wanted to be in front of her people. And so I held a business debut for her. So that was the advantage. The disadvantage was that a lot of the people who couldn't order inventory, weren't really serious about their business, and there wasn't a high level of commitment to their business. Therefore, they didn't really work to get a whole lot of people at their business debut, and it wasn't always a big success. And so, some of the times I felt like, this may not have been completely worth my time because there's not the commitment level. She doesn't have the commitment level of somebody who would have inventory. And so I would just say use your intuition on that. There are people who are really serious and committed to their Mary Kay business who just can't get inventory. And if you really sense you have a person like that, I'd be willing to go hold a business debut for her to support her. But if you feel like maybe the commitment level is lacking, then just coach her on a power start and how to start working towards Gen X or Gen X Elite. So use your intuition on that. Once our unit size grew to a certain point, and grew really large, then I just started doing business debuts for star consultants. And the reason I did that was, number one, just because of my time. I couldn't do business debuts. It just was a logistical time issue. There's no way humanly possible I could have done business debuts for everyone. And I wanted to just focus most of my time on the people who were committed. And when a consultant spends her money, that does show a level of commitment that is different from somebody else who's not willing to spend a little bit of money and make an investment on the front end. So if somebody's willing to make an investment, that usually is a sign that there's a level of commitment and excitement about really working her Mary Kay business. And so when you book a business debut, you want to book it as soon as possible. I mean, don't wait and wait and wait and wait and wait for it. You want to book it as soon as possible. And you want to really coach it. Okay, you really, really want to coach the business debut. On my website at lealaughlin.com, there is a business debut page. And I would recommend once you get your website up and running that you have the same thing. You have a business debut page and it has a checklist for things that she needs to get ready for the debut. It's got a contact list that she can start getting her list of friends and family down that she's going to invite. And it's got some other information on there that is very helpful. So it's great to have that information and that support, but don't only rely on that. There was a season in my business that once I got my website up and running and had all that information on there, I'm like, okay, great. They can just go read the information there and I won't have to spend as much time coaching on the phone because they can just go read the information. But I assumed way too much. I assumed people took the initiative to go there and read it and understand and process all the information. But the fact was that a lot of people didn't. And so then all of a sudden I was showing up at these debuts and there was very few people there and they didn't know to save refreshments till the end. And they didn't know how to set up the room and they didn't have product displayed. It was just simple, basic things that were in the checklist that I assumed they read, but come to find out they didn't. And so I really got serious about coaching them, even though the information was on the website. Okay. And when I say coaching, I mean live one-on-one coaching, like actually having a live conversation about my expectations for the business debut. So the first coaching call is right when we pick the date. Right when the date goes on the calendar, I have a coaching call. And the first thing and the most important thing that I really emphasize is how many people to invite and how to invite them. If you don't tell people this, if you don't coach them and train them on this, they will just post it on Facebook and expect to get a good turnout. And we all know that that is just not going to happen. And so you've got to coach them on how many people to invite and how to invite them. And I train them that half of half will show up. That's usually the numbers we see. Half of the people they invite will say yes or maybe, and then half of those people will actually show up that day. So half of half. When consultants read invite 50, they think, oh my gosh, I don't have room for 50 people. They don't realize that not even close to all of those 50 people are going to come. And so you've got to tell them like inviting 50 people is a low ball. That's like minimum of what you would need to invite to expect a turnout, a good turnout, which I believe a good turnout is like 10 to 15. And of course, the more, the merrier. I also tell them of a consultant in our unit who broke a record. She had 41 guests at her business debut. So I tell them that number just to expand their thinking a little bit more and to maybe, spark the desire to maybe beat that record and just expand their mind about how many people they can expect. So I tell them how many to invite and then how to invite them. And here's what I instruct them and advise them to do. I ask them to send out a postcard 2 weeks before, a postcard invitation. There are examples of postcard invitations on my website that they can print or they can create their own. It's up to them. And then to send an evite about a week before at evite.com. I think those are just professional, nice invitations, and it's easy for people to just RSVP online. And then to call people about 2 to 3 days beforehand to get a final confirmation. I tell them that people are not going to RSVP because some consultants expect that when they realize people aren't RSVPing, they get discouraged. So I just tell them on the front end that nobody's going to probably RSVP. It takes them taking the initiative to call and follow up for them to get a yes or a no or a maybe from their guests. And I emphasize how important that phone call is, that they can't just rely on the email. They can't just rely on the postcard. They absolutely have to make the phone call. I do encourage them also to create a Facebook event too, but I do tell them that Facebook alone is not going to, it's not going to do the trick. They've got to be very consistent with follow-up. And when I tell them, how to talk about the debut, I tell them to use words like fun and girlfriend time and pampering and come support me and come for a fun girls' night out. I tell them to use words like that so that they're communicating this party that's going to be a lot of fun. to not just talk about Mary Kay and not just talk about the products, but talk about just the fun and girlfriend time and an opportunity for them to support their friend. And so you do want to tell them how to talk about it when they invite people so that they're using the right words that is going to spark interest with their friends and family for them to come. Also, I tell them at this point that we don't want any kids there and we love the children. Everybody loves the kids, but we want to make it a fun girls' night out and a fun time of pampering and relaxation for women. And when there's kids there, it's just a big time distraction. Even well-behaved kids and even babies sitting in a little car seat is still a distraction because women love babies. So they focus on the babies instead of the products and what is being presented at the debut. So I do tell them on the front end that to not have their kids or their friends' kids there, but I coach them on how to talk to their friends because some people get offended if they're told not to bring their kids. And so I tell them to sell it as if it's a girls' night out. And then if they have friends who have kids, make sure they talk to them live about, hey, girl, get a babysitter and just come out and have some time away from the kids tonight because it's going to be all about just having a girls' night. So you want to coach them on saying that. Also, dogs would be another big time distraction, and you just ask them if they have any pets in the house that might be a distraction, and maybe arrange for them to not be in the home that night. You want it to be distraction free and just all about pampering women. I do tell them to go look at the resources on my website and to read through them and to go through the checklist. But the most important thing I emphasize on the front end is how to invite people and how many to invite. I also make sure they're on Voxer so that I know that I can communicate with them quickly. And if they have questions, we can just have efficient communication. So I make sure they are using the Voxer app at this point. Then my second coaching call happens a couple of days before the event. A couple of days beforehand, I want to connect with her and find out how many yeses, nos, and maybes that she has. And I want to coach her on how to follow up. And this is a great opportunity that if she really hasn't heard from a lot of people or she has no's and maybes, it's a good opportunity for you to coach her on how to follow up, to make sure she follows up with everyone, and even coach her on possibly offering a little bit more incentive for people to come if her numbers are low at this point. It's also a great time to encourage her that, like, hey, usually this is the case that it's 2 or 3 days before the event and you haven't heard from a whole lot of people. That's normal. So just get on the phone and start confirming. You want to be able to encourage her with that. I also have her have refreshments for after the presentation. Food is just a distraction in the beginning, and we need people to stick around afterwards to get their orders and for the consultant to book parties with her guests. And food is the number one reason people will stick around. And so I coach her to have refreshments afterwards and to delegate that to somebody else, whether her mom or her sister or her best friend or whoever's there that can help her with that. I make sure she has somebody else do it so she doesn't have to worry about it. I want her completely focused on getting bookings. Also, I coach her on not passing out lookbooks or hostess packets before the presentation. We pass out all of that stuff at the end. Again, it's just a big time distraction to pass that stuff out on the front end. People just look at the catalog the whole time instead of listening. And so I make sure she doesn't pass out any information in the beginning. I make sure she sets up the room in kind of a semicircle, and it's just a comfortable atmosphere for people. Sometimes consultants think they should set up tables, and then people end up being at different tables, and I think that's a big time distraction. So I think the best situation is just in the living room and on the couches in a semicircle with couches and chairs. I do have her display product on the coffee table or the end tables or wherever we're having the party. And then I have her have the rest of her inventory in the back room. And so I do have her display product. I make sure she knows that she's expected to wear Mary Kay attire. You want her friends and family to take her seriously and see her as a professional and see that she's taking this business seriously. And one way to do that is just to look the part. And so you don't want her in jeans and a hoodie when you show up. You want her in Mary Kay attire, but you do have to coach her on that. And then I really emphasize how important it is for her to get bookings at the end. And one thing that consultants can get really caught up in is orders, just getting orders and taking up orders and going and running to get the products. And then they forget to get the bookings or they avoid getting bookings because that's the harder thing to do. And so I make sure that They know that booking is their priority. Orders are going to happen anyways, and I can help with them, and their recruiter can help with the orders, and those are less of a priority than the bookings. And here's what I tell them to say. Here's the script that I give them. I tell them to go up to every single guest with their date book that's already highlighted with times they can work their Mary Kay business, and thank each person for coming and say, hey, girl, I'd love to borrow your face. What's better for you? Would it be a weeknight or a weekend? Okay. Hey, girl, thanks for coming. I'd love to borrow your face to get my 30 faces in. What would be better for you, like a weeknight or a weekend? And I make sure they only give 2 options. An unskilled consultant will just say, well, hey, what's good for you in February? And that's too many choices and options for women. And when they have too many options, they can't make a decision. So I make sure she knows to only offer weeknights or weekends, and to continue to offer only 2 options until they narrow it down to a date and a time. I also coach her on tentative booking. A lot of times at a debut, women don't have their planners with them, or they weren't expecting to book an appointment, so they're not really sure of their schedule. And so they'll say something like, oh, well, hey, call me later. We can set up something later. And I really encourage the consultant that if that happens, which it happens very often, that she knows to use the tentative booking approach, where she would say, well, like, hey, I know you don't have your planner with you, but let's see if we can just pencil something in. What would typically work better for you? Would it be a weeknight or a weekend? Again, she offers the 2 options. And usually by doing that, she can narrow it down to a date. And even if it's penciled in, it's a lot more confirmed in that guest's mind than it would be if she just left and said, I'll call you later. Okay, because usually it's hard to follow up on a situation like that. So I do train her on tentative booking, and then I do train her on turning a facial into a party. And so when she goes up to all her guests at a debut to book with them, really she's approaching it with the idea of booking just a facial. And then once she gets them on the date book, then she talks to them about bringing friends. And she says, hey, when you bring girlfriends with you, it really helps me with my 30 faces, and you get some really great discounts and hostess credit with the hostess program that I have. So, hey, is there any reason why you wouldn't want to bring a couple of girlfriends to your appointment with you? Most people are pretty open and willing to do that. And so then I coach her to get a guest list on the spot. And the easiest way to do that is just have them fill out the back of the profile card with friends' names and numbers, or to follow up the next day for the guest list. And that's another thing I coach them on, is that once they book it, they set a time to follow up 24 hours later to confirm the date and the time, and also to get the guest list at that point. And that is really the majority of the information that I'm giving her. I'm just emphasizing over and over again how important it is to book her Power Start and her 30 faces the night of the debut, so she is ready to roll. And then as a director, you as a sales director would be taking initiative to set up career surveys and book guests to meeting for her. That was always my focus as a sales director. I wanted to talk to the people who were interested in the opportunity and help her earn her pearls of sharing. And I wanted to book guests to her meeting, again, to help her earn pearls of sharing. And that is one thing I would present at the debut. I would present all of the pearls, the pearl bracelet, the pearl earrings, and the pearl necklace. I would present those and tell guests that they can help their friend or their consultant earn these pearls by doing the career surveys, by coming to the meeting, and also if anybody was interested in the business opportunity, if they were her first qualified team member, of course she would earn the necklace. So I would present those. And so when I went around to book career surveys and guests to the meeting, they kind of knew that it was going to help her to earn the pearls. So it was an easy thing to set up with them because they knew it was helping their friend. And so those are the 2 coaching calls that you're going to do to coach the business debut so that it's a success. The first one is right when you set the date, and then the second one is a few days beforehand. And then also make sure they're looking at the information on the website. You would even ask them several questions that are on the checklist, like, hey, do you have your calculator and your money bag ready to go? Do you have pins and profile cards ready to go? Because she's going to need all of those supplies, and just make sure that she's gone through those things with the checklist, and maybe give her a reminder to go through it again to make sure she has everything. So that is how to coach a successful business debut.